Good morning. Shabbat Shalom. This is Rabbi Ed Feinstein at Valley Beth Shalom, and this is Valley Beth Shalom Live and Online. And this morning we gather for our Shabbat morning Torah study. One of the best ways to think about Jewish living is to think about Judaism as imposing upon us or offering us the opportunity to participate in a series of patterns in time. So, for example, the Jewish lifetime is patterned by rituals that mark the important moments in our lives: the marriage, the beginning of a family, the birth of children, the bar mitzvah of children, and then the marriage of children and the beginning of the life cycle again, and eventually the funeral service, the wishing farewell to a loved one, holding on to the soul through yahrzeit and Yizkor and Kaddish. The Jewish year is structured by the holidays of the year. We're coming up now to Tisha B'Av, and then in some months we'll be right up against the high holidays. There's two major blocks of holidays, one set in the fall when the dry season of the summer gives way to the wet season of the winter, and one in the springtime when the wet season of the winter gives way to the dry season of the summer. And those transitions are marked with holiday celebrations. The Jewish week has a structure. Shabbat is the queen. Shabbat is the arrival of sanctity into the course of a normal work week. And the entire Jewish life cycle is molded toward Shabbat. It's like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Shabbos, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Shabbos. You begin asking on Wednesday already what we're having for Shabbos dinner and who we're inviting over and what we're going to do to make it special. And the daily schedule of a Jew is structured. The time is marked by prayer in the morning, afternoon, and evening. And the day is structured through meals, which are gatherings of family and friends and colleagues and associates to celebrate life. Now, these are structures, and each structure carries a very deep sense of meaning. But sometimes the structures are not coordinated. For example, and this is what this week brings us to, there's a structure of the Torah reading. Every week, a section of the Torah is designated as the Parshat HaShavua, the weekly Torah portion. In many Jewish communities over the course of history, you would date your letters saying it's the Monday of Parshat Devarim or the Tuesday of Parshat Vayetchanan. You'd name the Parsha rather than a secular or a sacred date. The weekly Torah portions begin at Simchat Torah in the fall. 54 portions marked through the course of the year. We conclude just after Rosh Hashanah with the coming of Sukkot, and we start all over again in October with Simchat Torah. And then you have the holiday cycle, as I said, springtime and summertime. Now, the Torah reading cycle and the holiday cycle are not coordinated. You'd think they would be with the people as smart as us, So you'd think that when Passover rolled around, you'd be reading the story of Passover in the weekly Torah portion. Well, you don't. You read a section of Torah that tells the story of the Passover as a special reading for Passover. That's true. But the weekly readings of the Torah go from their own chronology, and they are not coordinated with the holiday cycle. So when you have a coincidence of these things, what portion falls out on Passover or Purim or Rosh Hashanah, it opens up the door for a great deal of very creative midrash to see why that Torah portion speaks to that moment, even though they were not coordinated together. And this week we have one of those cases, a remarkable case actually. This is the week that we're going to be welcoming Tisha B'Av, the ninth day of Av. Now, the ninth day of Av, as we discussed last week, is the day on which Jews gather to mourn and grieve all of the oppression and persecution, all the catastrophes, the tragedies that have befallen the Jewish people over the course of history. It is said to be the day that the first temple in 586 BCE, the first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians. And it is said to be the exact day that the Romans destroyed the second temple. And it is said to be the day on which Ferdinand and Isabel threw the Jews out of Spain. And it is said to be the day of the massacres of York and on through Jewish history. Whether these actually were the days or not is irrelevant. What's more important, of course, is that this is a day on which all the catastrophe of Jewish history has been concentrated. otherwise, if we kept each date, you wouldn't have a day of the year when you wouldn't be mourning and fasting and grieving. And Jewish life is about celebration of life. It's about finding joy and finding meaning in life. And so what the tradition did very cleverly was take all of these dates and smash them into one day. Now, it's not just one day, of course, because then it becomes a season. For some Jews, it becomes a Shvat Sar B'Tammuz, the 17th day of the month of Tammuz, when the Romans were said to have broken through the walls of Jerusalem. For others, it begins with Rosh Chodesh Av, which we celebrated this last week, and brings us the 10 days between the 1st of Av and the 9th of Av. And then for the days after Av, there's a similar kind of sense of trepidation that goes along with having experienced trauma and healing from the trauma. The Torah portion that we read today is the beginning of the book of Devarim, the beginning of the book of Deuteronomy. So to catch you up on the story, of course, we came out of Egypt, we came to Mount Sinai, we spent 2 years at Mount Sinai receiving God's Torah, and then proceeded through the desert. It took 40 years because of the sins of the people, their intransigence and the difficulty of finding the liberation within. And finally, we arrive at the boundaries of Eretz Canaan. We arrive at the goal. We arrive at the boundaries of our dreams at the end of last week's Torah portion, at the end of Matot Maseh. But now we stop, and for another 2 years, Moses is going to speak to us. The entire book of Deuteronomy is a speech. It's a farewell speech and an autobiographical reflection by Moses. Now, the coincidence of Moses's oration and his recounting of the desert experience, particularly remember that he's not talking to the people he took out of Egypt. He's talking to their kids. And he's talking to them and explaining to them why it took 40 years to make a journey that should have taken 2 weeks. Why they had to die in the desert. What were the sins of their parents? What were the shortcomings, the intransigence and stubbornness and difficulty of their parents' enslavement within, if not without. Their parents' enslavement that made it necessary for this journey to take so long. And he's explaining to them, and he's including himself. You'll see in this Parsha that he's not exactly shirking responsibility. He does blame them, it's true. But he's the leader, he's the teacher, he's the liberator. And while he was successful in redeeming them from the slavery of Egypt, he was successful in getting the people out of Egypt. He was not so successful in getting the Egypt out of the people. He was not successful in redeeming them spiritually and giving them an attachment to God and a loyalty to covenant that would have enabled them to enter the promised land immediately. And that's what this Torah portion begins. And in that way, there is a thematic, or at least a deep resonance between the Parsha of Devarim, the beginning of the book of Deuteronomy that Moses is speaking, and this day of Tisha B'Av. When Jews look at catastrophe, we do an interesting thing. We ask what everybody asks. We ask, why us? Why me? Why did we have to suffer? Why were we oppressed like this? Now, for modern people, we tend to look for socioeconomic and political reasons for catastrophes. What was it in the politics of the time or the economics of the time? What caused this event? But the Jews of ancient Israel, the Jews of traditional Judaism, have always seen that God is in charge of history. And if God is in charge of history and a catastrophe comes our way, it can only mean that God is punishing us, that we have in some way deserved this. And so we go back into our history and we gather in what were the sins of the moment. Now, this is going to sound a little neurotic, and admittedly so, of course, to say something bad happened to me, what did I do to deserve it? That's a Jewish neurosis. But there is something rather creative about this. And what's creative about it, what's productive about it, is that it's not that my sin caused the event, but what could I learn from it? What can I take from this to help me grow? What can I take from this event to make me better? What can I take from this event that will impel me to a better life tomorrow? That is actually a productive project. I'm a cancer patient, as we spoke about before, and I don't blame my sins for my cancer, although, I ate enough chazarai, but I think instead, but I grew from the experience. And I don't wish this on anybody. It was a complete catastrophe. But if you survive and you can look back at it and say, well, here's what I learned. Here's how it has changed me. Here's what I gained from it. Somehow the event, the catastrophe, the tragedy can gain a sense of meaningfulness, not because it was caused by something. Causes were random. I got cancer the old-fashioned way, bad genetics, random genetics. But I learned from it. And by learning from it, by gaining something from it, I gained a sense of meaning. The Jews looked at the events, the destruction of the temple, the catastrophes of our expulsions and our persecutions, and they looked what they could gain from it, what they could understand from that, how we can grow from that. And that's what Tisha B'Av is. And so the Parsha of Devarim, in which Moses is asking, why did we have to suffer in the desert? Why did we have to struggle in the desert? And this holiday in which we're asking, what can we grow from this? How can we become stronger from this event, from these tragedies? There is a resonance between the two. The holiday of Tisha B'Av is celebrated with, or commemorated rather, with fasting and with prayer. The idea being that if it was sin that brought on this event, then it is repentance that will release us. And we read the book of Lamentation and its call at the end of the book, Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva, Chadesh Yameinu kekedem, bring us back, bring us close, return us, God, and renew our days as of old. Here too, the idea that we do teshuvah. Now, all that being said, there is one other aspect to this which I think is really remarkable. We might look at this again as moderns and say it's a Jewish neurosis to blame yourself and your sins for the destructions brought on by the Babylonian Empire and the Roman Empire and the expulsions of European monarchs. But it's not exactly that strong a case, the neurotic case that is, because there are some events, there were mistakes, there were some very, very distinct mistakes. And in that, I think that we can see that in the haftarah that the rabbis chose for this day. Now, I said before that the cycle of the Torah readings is not coordinated with the holidays. It just comes as it comes during the course of the year, starting with Genesis, working through Deuteronomy. But the cycle of the haftarot, the cycle of the prophetic sections that are read for each week, they were deliberately chosen by the rabbis and deliberately chosen to correspond to the events of the week, the events of the holiday, the events that are celebrated. And here, the rabbis give us a remarkable haftarah. It is both coordinated with the Torah portion and with the moment of Tisha B'Av. And it is the first chapter of the book of Isaiah. So here is the book of Isaiah. And it is the beginning, it is the opening of Isaiah's prophecy. It begins with the words Chazon Yeshayahu. Chazon Yeshayahu, the vision of Isaiah. Chazon Yeshayahu, the vision of Isaiah, son of Amos. So in Deuteronomy, we're beginning the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy today. The first Parsha in Deuteronomy are the words of Moses. Ve'ela hadvarim asher diber Moshe el kol adat b'nei Yisrael. Here are the words that Moses spoke to the people of Israel. And here is Isaiah, the greatest of the classical prophets, telling us here are his words spoken to the people Israel. And in the same way that Moses is searching for an explanation about our long journey in the desert, here is Isaiah trying to tell the people about what's coming, trying to help them understand what is about to happen. What is about to happen to you and why it's going to happen and what you need to learn from this and what you need to gain from this and to give us a clue about why it's all happening. Let's take a moment and discuss Yeshayahu. Some of you have been with me at Lunch and Learn over the course of this summer, and we've been studying the classical prophets, so you've heard a bit of this before. First of all, in the Bible, we have three sections, Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. That's where you get Tanakh, Torah is the first 5 books of Moses, from the creation of the world, the initiation of the Jewish people, our slavery in Egypt, our escape from Egypt, our wandering across the desert, leading up to this book of Deuteronomy, which prepares us for the entrance into Canaan. The next section of the Hebrew Bible is called Prophets, and it's divided into 2. The first set of books, 4 books, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, are historical books that tell us about the story of the people Israel when they lived in the land of Israel. The first book, Joshua, tells about the conquest and the allocation of the land. Judges talks about a period before the kingship, when we were ruled and governed by occasional chieftains and their struggles with the neighboring peoples. Samuel gives us the beginning of the kingship, first the kingship of Saul, and then the kingship of David. And then Kings starts with the death of David, the beginning of Solomon's kingship. Following the death of King Solomon, the kingdom is split, and there's a northern Jewish kingdom and a southern Jewish kingdom. The northern kingdom, called Israel, capitaled in Samaria, becomes a rich and powerful region. The southern kingdom always was capitaled in Jerusalem, governed by a descendant of King David, and remained a sort of backwater for most of its history. What happens at the end is that, of course, the rise of great empires. And the first great empire is Assyria, and Assyria comes across the Fertile Crescent and destroys the northern kingdom, but spares the southern kingdom. That happens in 722 BCE. And then the southern kingdom persists and actually becomes quite powerful. But in 586 BCE, it's destroyed by the Babylonians. And with that destruction and the exile, the book of 2 Kings comes to an end. The second half of the biblical section of prophets are the classical prophets. They all lived during the time of the book of 2 Kings. And they tell us from the perspective of this unique group of men what life looked like. So imagine, for example, the beginning early prophets, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, King, is sort of like the news section of a newspaper. The prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and then an anthology of 12 shorter books of prophets, is sort of the editorial page. And these are the comments, the speeches, the perceptions of this extraordinary group of men who we call the classical prophets, all of whom lived during the book of 2 Kings, and all of them are reflecting on the events we're about to talk about. The third section of the Hebrew Bible is called Ketuvim, writings, and that begins with the book of Psalms, and then Proverbs, and then the book of Job, of reflection on good and evil in the world. And then a whole series of books, 5 short books of Megillot that we read on special occasions, the Megillah of the story of Esther, the story of Lamentations, Song of Songs, Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, and the book of Ruth, and then a book of miscellaneous, then a few miscellaneous. The third section of the Bible is much like my mother's garage. It was all this stuff that was too good to throw out, but not good enough to bring into the house. That's how the Hebrew Bible is set up. So now we're going to jump. The Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, read in synagogue every single week. Every week there is a section taken from the prophets, either the first 4 books or the second 4 books of prophets that are assigned to a particular Torah reading. And this week we get the book of Isaiah, the beginning of the book of Isaiah. So who is Isaiah? Isaiah is living at the most interesting moment. He begins his prophecy just before the destruction, about 740, just before the destruction of the northern kingdom. He lives in Jerusalem, and apparently he's from a pretty prominent family because he has a great deal of connection with the king and the king's court. Isaiah and his people witness the destruction of the northern kingdom, and it shakes them. And they begin wondering who and what we are in the world. And Isaiah begins his prophecy in those years from just before the destruction of the northern kingdom to about 100 years before the destruction of the southern kingdom. And what is he going to be talking about? Well, there's 3 principal themes. Jerusalem that he's living in has now become a refugee center for all of those coming from the north. It's become a powerful and prosperous city, and it's becoming a regional center. And there are 3 principal dilemmas that Isaiah is going to be dealing with. Dilemma number 1. David and Solomon were able to build their kingdoms because the two great empires that governed the Middle East through most of its history were in quiescence. The empire of the north is in Mesopotamia, in what's today Iraq, and the empire of the south is Egypt. Egypt and Mesopotamia were sort of quiet. They didn't have much power. There were a lot of internal rivalries, and because of that, there was a gap. There was more than 100 years of sort of a quiet time when David and Solomon were able to expand the power of the Israelite empire. But now, during this time of the book of 2 Kings, during the 8th century, the 700s, the great empires are rising again. And the great empire of the north, which in Mesopotamia, the north of Mesopotamia, called Assyria. In Hebrew, it's called Ashur. It's capitaled in a city called Nineveh, which we'll talk about as we get closer to Yom Kippur, because that's the famous story where the Jonah story takes place. And it's today, by the way, Nineveh is Mosul. You've heard of that city. This becomes a fearsome, powerful empire. And what they want to do, of course, is control the world. And the way you control the world is controlling the highway, and the highway that leads from Mesopotamia down the coast into Egypt. Well, we live on that highway. The highway is our home. And that's what happens. So the Assyrians come and threaten the northern kingdom of Israel, believing that it has the power to resist the empire, gathers in all the other city-states into an alliance. They try to get Judea to join the alliance, which is something that the book of Isaiah will reflect upon. And they resist the Assyrians, and the Assyrians destroy them in 722. When the Assyrians come to Jerusalem, they realize that it's not worth destroying. The king surrenders to them, gives them tribute, and Assyria effectively spares Jerusalem. At least it's spared for a while. Here's the question, though. It's a problem of cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is when you hold an idea about yourself and it doesn't fit with the way the world responds to you. So what do you do if you believe that you're the children of the God of the universe? What do you do if you believe that you're the chosen of the God of the universe? What do you believe if you believe that your city is the chosen home of the God of the universe, and the temple where God lives is right in the middle of your town? And suddenly you find yourself politically weak, militarily helpless, unable to control the conditions of your own existence, peripheral, marginal, pretty unimportant. How do you square your own self-image as a very important person with the political reality, the empirical reality that you're a marginal, peripheral people on the edge of history, and that history is being made by these great empires and not being made by you? That's going to be problem number one. How do we understand ourselves in history? Problem number two. Remember that Jerusalem was always a very small town, and it was more like a village than a town. And in a village, everybody knows each other. In a village, there's very little crime because you can't steal. We know who you are. In a village, you don't have prostitution because we know your mom. In a village, everybody knows everybody. In a village, there's a different sense of social network. But when you become an urban center, and Jerusalem now is becoming an urban center, you have the beginning of all of the sins of urban life. You have urban anonymity. You have disparities of wealth and poverty, disparities of power and powerlessness. You have those who are the underclass who become crushed. And you have a political structure which is at the behest, which has been bought off, as it were, by the powerful and the rich. What happens to the social cohesion and solidarity when you become an urban center and we no longer have that sense of social network that belongs to a village? What happens when we have to face the sins of urban life? Poverty, homelessness, hunger, disease, prostitution, the degradation of women, the abandonment of children, urban anonymity and all of its sins. That's the second problem. And the third problem is a religious problem. we are bidden by the Ten Commandments, by the covenant of God, to be completely and totally loyal to the one God, to the God of Israel, to Adonai. But that's difficult at a moment of stress when other gods begin to crowd in. And other gods mean people are worried, people are afraid, people don't understand how this God's going to protect us. And so there isn't, a human predilection to sort of hedge your bets. And we begin to have something called syncretism, which is the addition of other gods, the adding of other gods. Now, part of this is political. The king forms alliances with other nations. You bring the princess into the kingdom. You marry the princess brings her gods. So now you have a whole street of other gods where there's shrines to other gods in your capital city. But part of it is popular as well. I mean, in the same way that we adopt and assimilate into cultural forms of the peoples around us while still maintaining a sense of our Jewishness. And our very traditional relatives look at us and look down on us and tell us that we've sold out completely. The prophets are going to look down at people's assimilating some of the religious practices of the locals and think that that's a sort of sellout. And these are the three problems that are going to animate Isaiah. Now you're going to see how Isaiah's prophecy is perfect for this week of Tisha B'Av, because he's going to begin to talk about who we are and what is our historical fate. So let's take a look again. He prophesies in the reigns of four great kings, Uzziah, Yotam, Achaz, Chizkiyahu. This is the time when Assyria is threatening and the world is changing. And Isaiah is trying to help his people understand who and what they are, but he wants to warn them that this is a moment of history that they have to attend to. And he wants them to become pure and be ready for it. Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord has spoken. I reared children and brought them up. They've rebelled against me. An ox knows its owner, an ass its master's crib, but Israel doesn't know. So he begins with a sort of lawsuit. This is an address to the court. He's saying a breach of contract has occurred. We had a covenant, and you've disobeyed the covenant. And even an animal knows who it belongs to, but somehow you people don't quite figure this one out. My people takes no thought. Sinful nation, laden with iniquity, brood of evildoers, depraved children. They've forsaken the Lord, spurned the Holy One of Israel, turned their backs on him, and now he lets them have it. Hear the word of the Lord, you chieftains of Sodom. Give ear to our God's instructions, you folk of Gomorrah. Now that had to hurt. Because what he's saying to these people is, you think that you're protected. You think that you have God's house in the middle of your city. You think that the sacrifices you bring, you think that the worship you offer is enough to protect you, even though you live in iniquity. But there is a terrible contradiction between the punctilious, careful, meticulous observance of the laws of the temple, the sacrifices you offer, and the laxness of your ethics, and the looseness of your loyalty to God. And therefore, what happens is that the sacrifices you bring become meaningless because they don't reflect an inner devotion to God, an inner devotion to the God of our ancestors. Now, I have to point out something that's very important here. We don't have the other side of the story. The prophet is standing in front of the temple of Jerusalem, and he's preaching to the people. And we don't know how they responded. I'm sure they weren't happy with this, because when you call a city Sodom and Gomorrah, you are saying something very powerful to them. They're doomed. They're going to be destroyed. And they think of themselves as righteous people. And they say, wait, but we don't have what the crowd shouted back. We don't have the argument back. And that's a problem. So you have to play sort of Jeopardy here. You have to figure out what was the question. What was the other side of the argument? I think the other side of the argument is something that we're familiar with. I say, prophet, what are you talking about? Look at the beautiful city we've built. Look at the wonderful temple that we worship in. Look at the care that we bring our sacrifices. Look how much care we bring to the priests of the temple. Look how much care we put in to the practice of our faith. And more than that, if you accuse us as you accuse us of urban sin, every city has this. Every city has this. This is going to be one of the essences of prophecy. He's not calling out radical evil. He's looking at the things that all of us see every day walking our cities. Homeless families, homeless people, abandoned children, the hungry, the sick, the lame, those who are abandoned, disenfranchised, disempowered, dismissed, those who become socially invisible. Social invisibility. The ones we just don't see. But you see, the prophet has powerful eyes. He can see what we don't see. He can see the falseness of our religious convictions because our religious convictions mask our common the urban sin, and he can see the falseness of religious conviction, which mask the sort of looseness with which we keep the monotheistic covenant. He can see the evil that lives all around us. He sees it and it hurts him. You feel an emotionality in this. I mean, what does it take to go to the middle of your city, the city you grew up in, with the people you love, and say to them, you are no more than Sodom and Gomorrah to me. You're going to be destroyed. That's frightening. That is a frightening accusation. Listen carefully. I am sated with the burnt offerings of rams and the suet of fatlings. The blood of bulls I have no delight. In lambs and he-goats that you come before me. Who asked you of that? Who asked that of you? Well, the answer is, of course, is the book of Leviticus did. The Torah did. The book of Leviticus is a guided tour through every sacrifice. And the people are going to say, but we're doing it right, prophet. And he said, no, you're not. Because doing it isn't the point. Feeling it, being loyal to it is the point. I am sated. I am nauseous. I am sickened by your sacrifice. That you come before me? Who asked you of that? Trample my courts no more. Bringing oblation, that's sacrifice, is futile. Incense, that's part of the worship, is offensive to me. New moons and Sabbath, those are occasions for special sacrifices. New moons and Sabbath, proclaiming of solemnities, assemblies of iniquity, I cannot imbibe. Your new moons and fixed seasons fill me with loathing. Or the prophet says, you make me sick, says God. Because it's not a true devotion. They become a burden to me. I can't endure them. And when you lift up your hands, I turn my eyes away, and you pray at length, I will not listen. Your hands are stained with crime. Wash yourselves clean. Put away your evil doings away from my sight. Cease to do evil. Learn to do good. Here is where Tisha B'Av fits this Parsha. Because Tisha B'Av is about doing a teshuvah, looking upon the destructions, the catastrophes of our history, and saying they call upon us to be better, to be deeper, to be wiser. It also fits with Deuteronomy, which is Moses' claim to the people that you need to remember why your ancestors spent 40 years in the desert and not repeat their sins. They wanted to go back to Egypt because they could never let go of Egypt. Cease to do evil, learn to do good. Devote yourselves to justice, aid the wrong, uphold the rights of the orphan, defend the cause of the widow. Come, let us reach an understanding. And now he speaks about teshuvah. Now he speaks about this beautiful gift that the Jewish tradition gives us. Teshuvah is a gift because it says that whatever you've done can be undone. And I want to make a point here. It's very, very important. We use the word sin, and on the holidays coming, on the high holidays, we're going to use that word a lot. But that word has been taken over by the Christian tradition. In the Christian tradition, the word sin refers to a state of being. It's the state of separation between human beings and God. It is the state of incurable separation. It is a state in which in the Christian tradition, only through Christ can a person be pure enough to return to God. In Judaism, a sin is not a state of being. A sin is an act. It's something we did. It stains us, it's true, but it can be cleansed. It can be cleansed. And that's what teshuvah is. We're not stuck We're not stuck in a sinful nature. There's no such thing as original sin in Judaism. We're not stuck in being sinful. Be your sins like crimson, they can turn snow white. That's a gift. God will accept your teshuvah. Be they red as dyed wool, they can become like fleece. If you agree and give heed, you will eat the good things of the earth. But if you refuse and disobey, you'll be devoured by the sword. For it was the Lord has spoken. And now, if you look at verse 21, you see that line is almost exactly the first line of the book of Echa, the book of Lamentation, which we're going to read on Tisha B'Av. Alas, Echa, she has become a harlot. That line, by the way, is read, when we read the haftarah, that line is read to the trup, the melody, not of the haftarah, which is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, right? It's read instead to the song of the melody of Echa. Echa Yashva Badad Ha'ir Rabatiyam da 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 da. Alas, she's become a harlot, the faithful city. That's the melody, because this is his lamentation. If you don't change, this is what's coming. She has become a harlot, that faithful city, that was filled with justice, where righteousness dwelled, but now murderers. Jerusalem has turned from a village of righteousness to a metropolis filled with murder, with hate, with poverty, with injustice. But now murder. Your silver has turned to dross, your wine cut with water. And then if you go down to the end, why? Your rulers are rogues and cronies of thieves, everyone avid for presents and greedy for gifts. They do not judge the case of the orphan, and the widow's cause never reaches them. And then he gives the zinger at the bottom. Zion shall be saved in judgment. Sion tifadeh b'mishpat. Right? That's the great notion. Judgment or justice. It's justice that will bring an end to this. Isaiah is going to go on to give us a theory of history in which he's going to say to the people, it's not only your idolatry and not only your ignorance and your neglect of the social network of your people, the poor and the widow. There's one more thing. It's your embrace of the nation. It's your worship of your own power. It's your political hubris. He's going to say to them, let history happen. Don't hold on and don't resist. But the people aren't going to listen to them. And a generation later, when the prophecy of Jeremiah, the destruction is going to come. And that's going to be what we remember on Tisha B'Av. Here is a prophet who says to us, the way that you live your life, the loyalty you have to a covenant, the way that a culture treats its poor, its indigent, its dispossessed, its disempowered, makes a difference in the destiny of that nation. The destiny of nations is measured not by the power of its armies, not by the magnificence of its buildings, not by the ingenuity of its scientists, but in the way that we treat each other, in the social solidarity that's built up over a sense of caring for each other, in a deep sense of mutual compassion and care, of mutuality that exists at the heart of a civilization. And that is the thing that God judges us on. That's what history judges on. So Tisha B'Av this week, as we read the book of Deuteronomy, we begin the book of Deuteronomy, we begin the book of Isaiah. And I have you wonder, as we look outside at what's going on in the world today, what are the lessons? Of course, there'll be commissions, and there'll be investigations of the catastrophes of our own moment. But what can the prophet teach us about how we look at ourselves and whether we are observing what he saw as the necessary covenantal justice, the necessity of covenantal justice, of holding on to each other, of protecting each other, of being caring and responsible for each other, that is really in the end the foundation of a culture and a civilization, what enables a culture and a civilization to survive catastrophe. What Isaiah is saying to his people is so wonderfully important. If you hold on to each other, even if the Assyrians come and destroy the city, even if the Babylonians come and destroy the city, even if the Romans come and destroy the city, even if the Spanish monarchs throw us out of Iberia, even if we wander across the world, wander across Europe, and wander across the world as exiles, no matter what happens to us, if we observe this standard of covenantal justice, taking care of each other, doing what is right, being sensitive, seeing the other, then we will survive and we will thrive and God will bless us. That the political conditions under which we live are really not nearly as important as the internal solidarity, mutuality, and care that a people shows for one another. And that's a beautiful lesson. Let me wish you a good Shabbos and hope that you'll join us next week. Following this, of course, there's Shabbos davening, and then I wish you this week, Rabbi Silverman is taking some rest, so there's no Rabbi Silverman today, Havdalah tonight, and Minyan every day this week. I wish you a very, very good Shabbos.